What can your congregation do to make a difference? As you reflect upon this question, think about it in terms of Ephesians 4:7, 12 through 13. But to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it, to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. We are hoping you will discuss the gifts your congregation has to help move forward the racial dialogue. This could be a difficult discussion, but one that can bear much fruit if we think deeply about how God has gifted us to be in relationship with each other. To help your reflection, listen to the panel reflect upon this question.
Krista Tippett, I want to have you tell a story about a change of heart that you witnessed, and it was when you were in Montgomery with John Lewis. And tell us the story about it was the chief of police.
The chief of police. Yeah, when we were in a church, and somebody else that was supposed to be there, the mayor or something, couldn't make it, and they said, so we had the chief of police, like we were settling for the chief of police, and it was this completely historic moment where this, I don't know, pretty young white chief of police of Montgomery apologized to John Lewis. This had never happened before. Talked about how he'd come into that police department and realized they didn't know their own history. And so they started learning their history and studying it and reflecting on it and grappling with it. He actually gave John Lewis his badge, which is the highest, expression that a policeman can do. I mean, I also want to say, though, something interesting about living in the 21st century is that we're learning that changing hearts also means, what we mean when we say changing hearts also means changing neurotransmitters. We have some great science. We're learning to understand how human beings really change how they live and interact with others that is on our side as we wade back into these waters.
Joe, that story, is that that's a change of heart, or at least a change of attitude? That's what the kind of thing we need.
Yes, it's a change of heart and change of attitude, but then that has to carry into, how do I practice this in my daily walk? How do I practice this in the corporate boardroom when decisions are made that lead to oppression? How does this happen even within churches that are often segregated? How do we break across that? What we've done in this district, in Greater Washington District, is to begin bringing churches and people across our city to begin looking at how do we change hearts that then leads to change systems. And so we've had 2 events already since Ferguson, are planning ongoing ones that begin looking at how do we improve relationships with police departments? How do we partner with police officers to look at changing policies and changing laws and changing ways? How do we come into educational institutions, both public schools and private industries, and do the same? So a lot of people are starting to work on this. So the dialogue is not just dialogue that stays in a room. It's starting to take action in local churches, but also in community institutions.
We now have a large number in our community. A large percentage are from South Asia. They're from Pakistan. They're from India. And we just realized we're never going to reach those folks. 49% last year of our preschool population was from South Asia. Well, that might want to say something to us, right? So we looked at, again, we look at the numbers, and then guess what? Those families would not volunteer in the preschool until we brought a Pakistani pastor on staff, and he went in front of those parents and said, by the way, we'd like you to volunteer in the preschool, and suddenly participation levels shot up. We find any place where we can serve together and live together and learn each other's names is transforming. And so that Pakistani pastor had problems with the immigration, and I had members of my church, because he was in a small group with them, were coming up to me saying, it's not right, he's being delayed in the immigration process. I had people with surprising political affiliations complaining about the immigration system. And when they came to me, they said, what are we going to do? And so I just stood in front of the congregation and I said that, and I said, we need to pray about this. We need to pray about Nadim's situation. Suddenly people were calling our congressman. And they were saying this is wrong. And suddenly, good things were beginning to happen. Now, that's a micro issue. The question for the church I serve is how will we continue the progress to get to the macro issues of the society, but it won't happen until we know each other's names. And you know, the threshold for a multicultural church is 20%. Like, that's doable for you. You could do that. We keep looking at race as a justice issue. We need to understand as churches, it's an evangelism issue. If we think we're going to retain the generation that's coming through these very diverse communities and who have cross-racial skills that many of us as adults have to develop and learn, but they've got these cross-racial skills already in place because of their educational experience, they don't take us seriously until we look like the community. Until we live in community, they don't think we are a community. And so I think that, Mike, is one of the big issues that churches ought to think about. As important as justice is, as important as it is to think about, Ferguson, what's the church's response, there is another reason we should be thinking about this.
It disturbs me when I see, I mean, there are some, clergy leaders who are really profound and really out there doing the thing that is the thing. As I mentioned, I'm going back to Ferguson. This will be my second trip. I've actually been in St. Louis a number of times, but this will be my second trip to Ferguson, where we will be having another community conversation at Wellspring Church, which is a United Methodist Church, although they've taken the denominational label off of the church to make it more inviting. And, Pastor Willis Johnson there has been on it.
Phenomenal.
I mean, he's been in the streets, he's been with people, being a ministry of presence and leadership in a way that I think, which is why a lot of people know his name now, and he has made the church a place where people can have difficult conversations, and he's committed to having them. So I think he's very much on his game. But I also see an unwillingness in places that I worship of people being willing to name the problem and speak about it in a way that is hurtful to me and very painful to me. Because if you can't go to church to hear the truth, where can you go? So there is not one answer to your question.
Mike, I think
Joe.
just to pick up on where Michelle is, and David, I talked about this at chapel preaching here a few weeks ago. We desperately need a prophetic voice. We need it from the pulpit, we need it from the pews. Unfortunately, we have, and Krista, you talked about how the movement began in the church and always found its way to the church. There was preaching and singing, etc. We don't have enough prophetic voices coming from these two places. You mentioned Willis Johnson. I've been in relationship with Willis Johnson and with others nationally who are trying to bring a prophetic voice to this, at least from clergy. But we need to train more. We need to find people who have that burn to go along with the learn, and who have the guts and courage to put lives online and to put popularity online, to be uncomfortable.
Or how about just being the person at work who is the person who raises the diversity question, so it doesn't always have to be the black person?
Absolutely.
How about being the person at work who raises the LGBT question, so the gay person doesn't have to do it? How about be that one? How about be that one who stands up for someone who is not like you? How about just be that one? I don't really care as much about who I sit next to on Sunday as what they do on Monday.
Right.
And so,
All right. That's where the prophetic voices need to happen. They need to happen on Sunday, yes, but they need to happen when we leave here. They need to happen here tonight, but they need to happen out in the street.
Let me ask our pastors, does the church have a role in challenging people to be more literate in their consuming of news? I mean, should that be something that we challenge congregations to do, to not just live in your little stovepipe and hear only the things that you want to hear? And if so, how do you make that happen? I mean,
Well, I
Rachel,
think you said this once a while ago, that churches are one of those few places where people sit together across lines of difference, across lines of theological, political, ideological, economic, and sometimes racial difference. And so if we are just sitting in church side by side with one another and not taking advantage of the opportunity to learn from each other, and to encounter each other's different perspectives and worldviews, then we're not doing authentic community. And I think, yeah, we who was it that said you're supposed to carry the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other? You always have to be engaging what's going on in the world and the story of God, and making people's faith journey relevant to the things that they live in outside of the church. If you're just talking church talk, then who cares?
You know, when United Methodist pastors are ordained, we promise to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And so...
That's in the Virginia conference?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's a real promise.
That's good. I like that. We should do that.
And so I think that the main way we still do that today is the preaching. And if the pulpit is not used in a way that discomforts people, that reminds us of our basic prejudices and our basic outlooks on life, and doesn't challenge the echo chambers people wrap themselves in related to news sources and ideology, you know, as someone said earlier, if you're not going to get the truth in church, where are you going to get it? And so that is, I think, a role and function of the pastor, but that doesn't always have to be done in a prophetic modality. Part of the way we do that is we remind people of the great people of histories from multiple races. We remind people of the great odds people overcome in their own spiritual journeys and their own, frankly, in their unique American journeys as well. We have to go to, you know, the historical locations and then come back and tell our congregations, you know, the other day when I was at Frederick Douglass's house, this is what I observed. And make heroes, because the point is not for people to enter into my culture and be the church of my culture. That's just having a bunch of people in a room. The point is to try to get to the goal of actually being multicultural, where we need each other and learn from each other. And I think that will be uncomfortable, because sometimes it's going to require us to look at our congregants and say, can we be honest about what's really going on right now?
One of the great quotes from John Lewis in the conversation with Krista Tippett was, in terms of how do you make a difference, he said, you need to be a pilot light and not a firecracker.
Yeah.
You know, not to blow everything up, but to be there as a constant presence to keep it going. So I want to end with that, because we were getting close to our time.
I have one more John Lewis quote from an interview that I did with him. And he said, make good trouble.
Yeah. Well, and then there was another great one, when you pray, move your feet.
Yeah, that's an African proverb that they live by. When you pray, move your feet.
A reminder, we are hoping you will focus on this conversation through Ephesians 4:7, 12, and through 13. Thinking about the gifts your congregation brings to the table to further racial dialogues.